We start thinking about what it means to really follow Jesus. He said some hard things in Scripture, and so how the candy ties into this. Candy can be sweet; it can taste good to us, but if you just take that candy and shove it in and swallow it, we're going to get choked. Like, we know that, it's common sense. But I think sometimes some of the teachings that Jesus has, because they're hard, they ultimately are good for us, and they can satisfy us, and they taste good. If we're not careful about how we dive into them and enjoy those slowly and allow God to work those into our life, we either just choke on them, spit them back out, or we just don't ever try them to begin with. So this morning, I want us to kind of jump into that. And I think what happens a lot in our culture is very similar to what happened in Jesus' culture. So if you've ever kind of looked through the Gospels, you'll see that as Jesus was beginning his ministry and was walking around, you guys can go ahead and switch off that screen if you want. As Jesus was beginning to start his ministry, he was attracting large crowds of people. I mean, he was performing miracles. There were great things that were happening. And so people were interested in what Jesus was doing, the words that he was saying. He would teach unlike anybody else that had ever taught. He was doing things that they had just never seen done before. There was clearly something happening. And so crowds would begin to follow Jesus. I mean, they'd gather up on a mountainside, and he would take, a little boy's lunch, and he would turn it into enough food to feed thousands of people. So he was accumulating crowds of people. Here's the amazing thing about Jesus is that he did not come to set up some earthly kind of kingdom. He wasn't looking for a bunch of fanatics, as we would call them. He really wasn't that interested in the crowds. And so sometimes when Jesus felt that the crowds were following him for the wrong reasons, or they didn't really understand what he was inviting them to do, he would kind of turn around and teach for a moment, and he'd say some pretty hard things like what we're going to look at this morning. Because Jesus was ultimately not defining what he was doing by the size of the crowds, or if it was in this culture, it'd be, the number of Twitter followers or Facebook friends or any of that stuff. Like, that's not what told Jesus who he was. That's not what shaped the direction of his life. And so he had a lot of fans around him, a lot of fanatics, but Jesus was looking for followers. And in our culture today, I think we understand a lot of times what we've come to know about Jesus more from a fan or a fanatic perspective than from a discipleship perspective. And you think about it like this. I mean, we all have things that we're fanatics about, right? So I've pulled together a few of my things I'm fanatics about. Any Falcons fans in the room? Okay, not really. Check out on that one. Yeah, my Falcons fans aren't here today. I tried to give them a plug. Oh, okay. Did I hear somebody? Okay, all right. Any Braves fans? Few. Yeah, there we go. Good. Yankees fans, you can leave. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not much of a Braves fan after last night. Yeah. All right, any Tennessee fans? Yeah. We'll wear orange for a little while. We'll see how long that goes this season. Hopefully we keep losing defensive linemen. It's going to be a long season. So there's probably not a single other Pistons fan in here. I'll be walking around. Yeah, I didn't think so. I'll be walking around with my Pistons gear later. But that's what we do, right? You're a fan for something. You go out, you buy, depending on the season that the team plays, you go out, you buy your gear, you have your stuff. I'm a fan. I'm going to go watch them. I'll show up. I'll be there. I'll cheer. Yay. I'll celebrate when they win. I'll get really mad when they lose and I don't get what I want, which is a victory, so I can rub it in the face of my coworkers, right? It's like, yeah, we're fans. And I think what happens, because that's such a part of our culture, and there's not anything wrong with sports unless you take it too far to the extreme. But being a fanatic is such a part of our culture. If we're not careful, we kind of take the same approach to Jesus. We find ourselves just kind of becoming a fan of Jesus. Because here's what happens is you can be a fan of all those teams or whatever team you want to be a fan of. But when you think about going and actually trying to do what those people do, right? There's not any of us in here that, we're not going to go out and get on the field or run up and down the court or train like they did. Maybe some of you did in the past, but probably not any of us in here right now are playing at that level of what they play at, because that's not who we are at this moment. So we'll stand back at a distance and we'll be a fan. But what Jesus was constantly calling people to was to not be a fan, but to be a follower. And being a follower requires being a disciple, which means that you have to do what the one that you're following does. And so that's what Jesus was doing. That's why he would turn and say hard things, because it's as if he was saying, look, I don't want you to be a fan. I want you to be a follower. I want you to do what I do. And it's not always going to be easy. And so he invited his disciples into this in his book. I don't know if you've read this. It's a good book. It's called Not a Fan. I want to read you what the author says about this. Just a few words in this. He says this. He says, my concern is that many of our churches in America have gone from being sanctuaries to becoming stadiums. And every week, all the fans come to the stadium where they cheer for Jesus, but have no interest in truly following him. The biggest threat to the church today is fans who call themselves Christians, but aren't actually interested in following Christ. They want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not so close that it requires anything of them. He goes on and he says this. He says, fans don't mind Jesus doing a little touch-up work, but Jesus wants complete renovation. Fans come to Jesus thinking tune-up. Jesus is thinking overhaul. Fans think a little makeup is fine, but Jesus is thinking makeover. Fans think a little decorating is required, but Jesus wants a complete remodel. Fans want Jesus to inspire them, but Jesus actually wants to interfere and change their lives. It's a different way of thinking about it. And Jesus knew that ultimately what he wanted from people that were interested in him, that were grabbing hold of the words that he was saying, he didn't just want them to settle for being a fan from a distance. And that's our hope as a church, that we could challenge you enough that you see that this is actually a good thing and this is what God has for you. Because when we look at our lives, and I did this a couple of weeks ago, if you guys will switch over to my laptop real quick, I illustrated this. I'm not going to walk through it in detail like I did a couple of weeks ago, but I am going to just highlight this really quick. And I'm going to use some different words this time than what I used last time. So if you think about it like this, if you were here a few weeks ago, I drew a diagram, something like this, and I said there's a moment, and I put a C right here. There's a moment when we begin to realize that God exists. I said this is kind of a conception moment, when the idea of God gets conceived inside of us. But at some point, there's a spiritual birth that happens. And that's when a surrender happens. That's when we really give our lives to Jesus. And so you could almost think of it like this, using different words. Instead of putting C here, you could put F, and that F stands for fan. There's a moment when you became more aware that there's a God, and you said, hey, there's maybe something this guy has for me. I maybe ought to think about this. And you have this moment where you're like, all right, Jesus, he said some good things. I'm on board with some of it. Let's see what happens. But it's still very much focused on what we're going to get from him. There has to come this moment, though, where you go from being a fan to the other F, which is a follower. That's when birth happens. That's when we surrender and say, God, I'm all in. I trust you. Whatever you say, I want you to work that into my life. And that's what he desires to lead us into. You guys can go ahead and switch back off of that. And so I want you to think this morning, if you were to draw out that diagram and then put a mark beside, are you closer to being a fan or are you closer to being a follower? Because God's heart is that he wants you to be a follower. And we see in Scripture that there's this call to trust him in that way, and it gets verbalized in several different ways. Paul, for example, in Romans 10, verse 9, says that, he says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is what? Lord. He says you will be saved. Believe in your heart you will be saved. You skip on down to verse 13. He almost says the same exact thing again. He says, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord. You see, sometimes I think that we can, and sometimes it's the churches mess this up in the way that we present the gospel. It's as if we say, just believe in Jesus. Just agree intellectually that what he said is true. And if you'll just agree with that, then you're good. But that's not actually what Jesus taught, and that's not what Paul's teaching here. He says there's an element to this that you actually have to submit to him as Lord. And so if he is Lord and you confess that and say, I want you to be Lord of my life, that means he sits on the throne of our lives. That means he then begins to shape everything. So even in these verses, there's this high invitation because it said everyone, right? So it's open. There's not a single one of us, no matter how messed up, how difficult, no matter how far you may think that you've ran from God. It is an open invitation for everyone to come to him. But it's a high challenge invitation at the same time because it says that we must confess him as Lord. We must submit all of our life to him as the King of our heart. And so I set that up to say that in this series, we're going to unpack some of these difficult teachings that Jesus laid out. And this morning, we're going to begin with one of the most defining, yet can often be confusing things that Jesus said. And it's found in Luke 14:26. And Jesus says this in Luke 14:26. He says, if anyone, again, there's that open, welcome to everyone, high invitation. If anyone comes to me, here comes the challenge, and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. How many of you have come across that passage before? A few of us, so less than half the room. I just wonder, rhetorical question. Don't you love it when teachers ask rhetorical questions? Because it's like, I just want to yell out my answer. But how does that make you feel, if I can just ask that? When Jesus says you cannot be my disciple unless you hate. It's kind of a gut check. Jesus clearly is using a little bit, and I say a little bit because I don't want to soften this too much, but Jesus would oftentimes use hyperbole and exaggeration to make a very serious point. I mean, you read it somewhere else, you probably read the passage where Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Okay? Hopefully nobody goes home and does that. Like, you feel convicted of your sins, like, Jesus said do it. No, okay. He's speaking in hyperbole, but he does that because the point is very serious. The principle is very serious at what he's getting at. And so what I want us to look at here this morning is this big idea that we'll say it like this, is that Jesus wants to be the relationship in your life. Jesus wants to be the relationship in your life, not a relationship in your life, not one of many relationships in your life. He wants to be the relationship in your life. Now, immediately we start thinking through, well, what does this mean? How does this make sense? And a lot of times our first approach to thinking about, well, if Jesus is going to be the relationship in my life, well, then I'm going to put him first. Like, we say that with good intentions. Like, Jesus is going to be, he's going to be first. He's my number one. Like, he's top of my list. Well, then Jesus just becomes one of many relationships. I would say this, Jesus wants his own list. He wants to be a completely separate category, a space in your life that is reserved for him and him alone. And then as he is in that space in your life, he gets to determine any other list that you have. Like that's the authority that when we say, Jesus, you are my Lord, that's the authority that we're giving him. Is that he will be our pursuit, and the things that he says, we will trust them as good, and we'll walk into that way. The other way we say, well, I've got to fit Jesus into my life somehow. If Jesus is going to be the relationship, I got to fit him into my life. And I say, no, it's the wrong way to look at it. It's actually about us going to Jesus and saying, can I be a part of your story, Jesus? Can I just come and submit everything that I have at your feet, and you tell me what to do? I'm not asking you into my story. I want to be in your story, Jesus. And it's a shift in our perspective and how we come to think of that. 2 Corinthians 5:15 says this. It says that he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for who? For him, for Jesus. Jesus wants to be the relationship in your life. And at the same time as that he wants to do that in your life individually, Jesus is and will be the head of the church. He is the leader of the church. He is the cornerstone of his church. Generationally, globally, it is Jesus that's the head of the church. And for us as the Grove, that's our desire, is that we would look to Jesus as the relationship in our personal lives. But from that, we would see Jesus as that he is the head of the church. And if you've ever been in a church where there's a lot of division, there's a lot of feisting, there's divisiveness, there's a lot of agendas. If you've ever been in those settings, it's hard, it's difficult. And I would say we are far from a perfect church. But our desire and our challenge, and why we're willing to step into a series like this, is because I believe that if as individuals we'll wrestle with what Jesus is saying here, we'll wrestle with what it means to have him as the relationship in our life, then over time, guess what? We'll make sure that he is the leader of our church. And the things that he will lead us into are far greater than anything we could ever imagine. Jesus wants to be the relationship in our lives. So let's talk about this Jesus and church thing to help us understand the difference. So I want to make a few points underneath this. We're going to dive into what he means by hate, but we're getting there, so just hang with me. First thought is this, is that submission to Jesus and consistency with church are important but different conversations. I'll say it again. Submission to Jesus, so Jesus being the relationship in our life, and that and consistency with church, they're both important conversations, but they're different conversations. And I say this because one of our approaches when we say, I'm going to make Jesus the relationship in our life, is that we'll say, well, I'm going to go to church more, and that's just automatically going to get me closer to Jesus. So I want to talk about these two differently because our approach, a lot of times, it can vary on this depending on your upbringing. So one thing that I hear people say sometimes is, well, Jesus, I've got my Jesus and I don't need any church. You ever heard anybody say that? Probably not any of you, or you wouldn't be here this morning. You'd be somewhere else. But you probably heard those people say, I've got my Jesus, I don't need any church. I want to lean into that just for a minute. Because when Jesus is the relationship in your life, you understand then that church plays a part in that. A couple things that Jesus said, John 17, 22 and 23. Look at the wording that he uses here. Jesus says, the glory, he's praying to his Father in heaven, and he says, the glory that you have given me, I have now given to them. That's plural, right? It says that they may be one, even as we are one. I'm in them, and you in me, and that they may become perfectly what? One. So part of Jesus being the relationship in your life means that he is already, before you were even born, praying that you would coexist with other people. His church. And so to say that I've got my Jesus and I don't need church is to misunderstand the Jesus that you think that you have. And so I say that to say the steps that we take to be connected to a healthy church family, they're essential, they're good. And Hebrews 10:25 says don't neglect meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as I see the day drawing near. So people, we have these responses. You've probably heard them before. Maybe you've even used them and say, well, the church is full of hypocrites. I got my Jesus. The church is full of hypocrites. I don't need it. Well, yeah, it is. This church is full of hypocrites. There's a hypocrite standing here talking to you right now. Every single one of us have a dose of hypocrisy in our lives. None of us know what it's perfectly like to live with Jesus as the relationship in our life. But he's inviting us into that. The other thought on this, people will say, so I attend church, so then I must be good with Jesus. If I attend church, then I'm good with Jesus. That's probably more common and more fitting because you're here in a church service this morning. So your thought would be, I'm here. This is better than not being here. But at the same time, when I used to do student ministry, I would kind of say it like this. And y'all are way smarter than teenagers. No offense to teenagers in the room, right? No, I'm just kidding. But when you think about this, I used to say this to students. I was like, okay, you go walk onto a car lot. Does that turn you into a car? They're like, no. I was like, do you walk into McDonald's and become a McNugget? Well, no. Do you go into Taco Bell and become a taco? No. What's your point? Showing up to church service doesn't make you a follower of Jesus. It doesn't make you the church. That's something different that God does in your life. Now, a healthy church, a church that is focused on Jesus, can help encourage that. But just because you're a part of a church doesn't mean that everything's good with Jesus. Jesus actually, another hard thing that he says in Matthew 7:21 through 23. Look at what he says. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, do mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Jesus is saying, you can check every religious box. You can say, I've done everything that I'm supposed to do. But he says, I want to know you. I want a relationship with you. I want to guide and direct and influence your life. And I want you to know me in this way. That's what Jesus is inviting us to. So I know we still haven't unpacked this whole hate thing. And that's where I want to get to now. If you look at Matthew chapter 10, 37 through 39, Matthew records the same kind of teaching that Jesus was giving. But he words it a little differently, and I think it helps us understand what Jesus was saying when he used the word hate. Matthew 10, 37 through 39 says this. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So when you begin to think about what was Jesus really saying when he said we have to hate, let's think about this for a moment. Think of it like this, is that we are called to love Jesus with an unwavering commitment. We're to love Jesus with an unwavering commitment. Right now, real quick, I want you to think about somebody in your life right now that you really, really care about. Somebody that you really love, not that person you'd like to smack across the face because they get on your nerves. Focus on that person that you really, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your kids, I don't know, maybe it's your dog, I don't know what it is. Think about whoever it is in your life. Now, I'm going to do this illustration with thinking through how this works. The key is this is somebody that's in your life, and that you don't have to wake up and think about, do I love this person? Do I care about them every day? You just wake up and you do it. So, for my example, I'll use Jennifer. Pick on her since she's sitting over here. So you wake up in the morning. You think about your person, okay? Whoever your person is. You think of your person. You wake up. You get going in the day. I don't have to wake up in the morning and say, am I going to love Jennifer today? I don't think about that. You get up and you start doing what you do. When life gets difficult, you don't have to come back and say, well, I don't know. I'm going to make this decision, and I don't really care how it impacts her. I'm just going to do what I want and make that decision. And say perhaps temptation comes along and another girl shows up and tries to woo me into her presence. I don't have to go through this do I love Jennifer or am I going to go after this girl? Tough decision. No, it's pretty easy. I've got this resolved in my spirit. I know where I stand. And I use that not to talk about anything really has nothing to do with marriage. It has to do with what it looks like to have your life influenced and directed by something that you've just resolved and you've just settled. So you take that, you think about the relationship, maybe it's a relationship with your kid. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and say, am I going to love my kid today? It's like, you'd like to strangle them sometimes, but you're going to love them, right? It's non-negotiable. If somebody tried to show up and take your kid away from you, those are fighting words, right? People are going to see how much you're invested in that relationship. And so I say all that to say, when it comes to Jesus being the relationship in our life, it's not something that we should wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if I love Jesus today. And you maybe don't wake up wondering if you love Jesus today, but I just step back and say, what role is Jesus actively playing in your life? Today. How is tomorrow going to be better because you say that you follow Jesus? Because that's what he's saying. He's saying you've got all these other people in your life that are influencing you, that are having an impact on your emotions and your mood and your attitude. You've got all these other people around you. But how is your life going to be better tomorrow because you say that you're a follower of Jesus? That's what he wants us to wrestle with. Because he says, when you love me more than anything else, there is nothing that then will come in and disrupt that relationship. He will be the one, first and foremost, that you turn to when you need strength. He will be the one that you find your identity in. He will be the one that you come to. Regardless of what's going on, you turn to him. And if something or someone tries to come and create a separation between you and that relationship with Jesus, you're willing to put your foot down and say, no, this is a line I will not cross because I'm committed with an unwavering commitment to the one who has already loved me more than any person will ever love me. That's what Jesus is starting to get at here when he says, you got to love me more than anyone or anything or even your own life. It's let me lead you in this way. Now, you can look at this and you can think, wow, Jesus is being pretty divisive here. But you take this in the context of the rest of Jesus' teaching, and we can understand it a little bit more. I mean, Jesus then says things like, well, you got to love your enemies. It's like, okay, well, the enemy may try to get me to not love Jesus. Well, how do I deal with that? Yeah, it's messy. It's messy. It gets difficult. But Jesus says, I want you to love me more than anything else. Don't let anything take me away from you. And as you're figuring that out, love your enemies. Love those people who don't like the things that you like, who don't agree with the things that you agree with. Get this. Love the people who have different political views than you. Woo! Yeah, it just got hard. Jesus doesn't say, love the people only that you agree with. Because he says those things because he said this. I want to be the relationship in your life, and I want to teach you how to love those people you think you can't love. I want to show you what that looks like. And so as we trust him and we navigate through this with him, I'm reminded of what Paul said in Philippians 3:8. He says, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my what? Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish. Jesus just wants to know us in that way. He wants that kind of relationship with him, that love relationship that's built around an unwavering commitment that there's nothing that's going to show up and interrupt that. But then we dive deeper into this and we see that even as we do this, it will cause some shifts in our relationships. And that's the next thing, is that as we seek Jesus with this unwavering commitment, relationships in our life will shift, but they don't have to end. Relationships in your life will shift, but they don't have to end. So Jesus is saying here, look, you've got some relationships that are in your life. You've got mother, father, brother, sister, wife, spouse, whatever. You've got all these relationships in your life. And I'm saying I want to be the relationship in your life. But what he's not saying here is that there has to be this severing of relationships. We go through a change and shifts in relationships all throughout life. I mean, flashback to high school. How many of you in here right now are still closely connected with 10 people that you went to high school with? How many? At least 10 people. I see like 2 hands. How many 5 people that you're closely connected with from high school? A few more hands. Anybody connected closely with one person you went to high school with? Okay, so 1. Of all those hundreds of people, unless you're in a school like I was where you had 43 people in your class, all those people, you shift, the shift happens, right? And then Facebook shows up and you start getting friend requests. And it's like, I haven't talked to you in 15 years for a reason, right? It's like, stay away. Thank you, Facebook. So we get that. But we have a shift in relationships. There's a shift that happens, those of you that are married in the room. When I take couples through premarital counseling, we talk about the shift that happens as you get married, right? And typically that shift happens. Those of you that have been married probably walked through this. Any mama's boys in the room? We talk about that in counseling, okay? This is something that happens when you shift in the marriage relationship. A lot of times I was a little bit of a mama's boy, and so when I got married, I had to realize, like, I can still love my mama, but there's a new number one woman in my life now, right? And so that first call when I've had a great day needs to go to my wife now and not my mom. Like, it's a hard shift to walk through, right? It's this whole two becoming one thing. And on the other hand, with the wives, how many daddy's girls are in the room? Okay, a few of those. So that's a hard shift. Usually, I'm stereotyping, usually in marriages and relationships, but there's a shift that happens. A lot of times it's because us as guys are insecure and we want to try to fix everything, but you want to call your dad to get them to fix it, and so we feel like we can't do anything. And then you get to a point like me where you realize you can't fix anything and you ask them to call their dad because that makes everything better. I tried to fix something last week and I broke it and made it worse. And I was just like, I'm really done trying to fix stuff because I'm just helpless at this. So I was like, should have called your dad or should have called my dad. But there's shifts that happen in relationships. And so when you really start following Jesus, when he becomes the relationship in your life, it may cause some shifts in your relationship. But this is what Jesus is saying. Look, if you're really going to follow me, you can't fear how that might change some of your relationships. You really got to be in this with me. You see, a fan can stand back at the distance and blend in with the Jesus crowd, but then blend in with everybody else, and they just kind of get to pick and choose who they want to be. And Jesus is saying, that's not how this works. For some of us in the room, most of us probably, you've not had to wrestle with the decision of, if I follow Jesus, it may cost me my relationship with my family. But there are brothers and sisters in Christ all around this world who, when they convert to Christianity from another religion, they are literally disowned and cut off and kicked out of their house instantly. Do some research. Find a story about a Muslim woman or man that has come to faith in Christ, where they've shared their story and what it's like to be disowned from their family. You see, we hear Jesus say that you've got to be willing to hate everyone else if you're going to follow me, and we're like, oh, okay, whatever. But then we have people around the globe living right now that they understand the fullness of what this means. That I have to have an unwavering commitment to Christ. Even if it causes some shifts in the relationships, like I've got to be this in it with Jesus. So now it may not be that extreme for you, but it may shift some of your relationships. But here's what I want to clarify, because I think we mess this up too. We misunderstand what Jesus is saying. I grew up in a setting that went something like this. When you give your life to Jesus, you need to cut off everybody from your life that does not also follow Jesus. Anybody hear that growing up? It's like, yeah, get away from all those bad people. Like, you're a follower of Jesus now, cut everybody bad out of your life. It's only good. It's only church people. And then you find out church people are messed up too. And it's like, well, I don't know what to do. And you get in this, it's like we start having like this sacred holy people, and everybody else is jacked up. That's kind of how we start to think about it. The interesting thing is, the king that we pledge our allegiance to, Jesus, if I'm not mistaken, he had this reputation where he was known as a friend of what? Sinners. So here's how this plays out. You allow Jesus to be the relationship in your life. Yes, it's going to cause some shifts, but I don't think that means you have to immediately cut off all ties. Because I believe that as God transforms your heart and gives you a greater story to live by and to tell, well, who else is going to reach those people? You already have the relationships there. So I think there's a way that God wants to work through our lives in the midst of the relationships that are currently all around us. What you and I have to realize is that letting Jesus be the relationship in our life, it may cause some shifts in those relationships, but they don't have to come to an end. And at the end of the day, you're not responsible for how they respond to you, but you are responsible for how you respond to them. Paul says it like this in Colossians 4, 5, and 6. He says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. James says this in 1:19. He says, know this, my beloved brothers, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. There's a way, even as Jesus becomes the relationship in our life, that we can still exist and be friends with and interact with the people around us that are maybe not where we're at with Jesus. And there's a way, I think, that you can do that without being holier than thou and Bible thumping them and pushing them even further away from God. I think God will give you wisdom on what that looks like for you in your context and how to maybe make what shifts need to happen and what shifts don't need to happen. That's something that he can lead you into. But that's what he called his disciples to. That's what he prayed over us before he ascended back to heaven. These are things that Jesus has for us. And so we looked at the what. What does this mean? It means that we love him with an unwavering commitment, that it's just part of who we are. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to process it. Am I going to love Jesus? Am I going to allow him to lead me into this? We don't have to work through any of those things. We realize that it may cause some shifts in our relationship, but why? Why should we even go down this road? And I'll end with this. If you back up in our Matthew passage in Matthew 10, look a few verses earlier, verse 28. So before Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, you got to love me more, he says these things. He says, and do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. Why should you trust Jesus as the relationship in your life? I think this is one of many great reasons. It's because the identity that Jesus gives you will overcome all fears. And if we're honest this morning, every single one of us in here, you're scared of something. You're scared, and most of it is externally focused. It's what other people think about you. It's what your circumstances may do to you. It's what you can or can't control. It's how much money you have in the bank. It's how big your house is and how somebody may perceive that. We've got all these externals all around us that attempt to give us our identity. And if there's any reason to trust Jesus as the relationship in your life, and then to pursue that on a daily basis, it's because the way that He sees you, He already knows your weaknesses. He already knows more about you than you'll ever know about yourself. I mean, He says in this text, the numbers of hairs on your head are numbered. Now, for some of us, that's not that many, but I mean, it's not really about the numbers of hairs. What He's saying in the midst of that is, I know you. There's not a single one, regardless of how much hair you have on your head, you don't know how much you have. Jesus said, I know you better than you know yourself. And so whatever you're afraid of externally, I know your heart. That's what Jesus is saying. You're so fearful of these things that may hit you and come against you. But when you trust me as the relationship in your life, I already know your heart, and I've dealt with it. I've paid the price for it, and I'm inviting you to follow me, and that's all you need to rest in. The identity that Jesus wants to give you overcomes all fears, and that's one of the best whys I can give you, because if we're honest, we're a fearful people in the way that we go about this life. We make so many decisions based off of fear. Fear of how this person may perceive us or that person may perceive us. And Jesus said, look, the only fear that you need to have is me, because I know you inside and out. So there's kind of this rebuke in there, but then there's this approval that He gives, and He says, so yes, I know you, and I am in control of the body and the soul and eternity. But here's what I'd love to do for you. I'd love to declare before the Father in heaven that I know you and that you are mine. And He won't just do that when we die and we get to heaven, as we talked about last week. The future is going to be better and the future is going to be great. But what Jesus wants you to know is that He approves of you right now. He invites you into relationship with Him right now. And He wants to be the relationship in your life. And as you learn to walk in that and trust that and pursue that and work through those hard parts of following Him, He affirms that identity. He gives you the confidence to stand, because there's going to be people all around you that will tell you how you're not worth anything, how you didn't meet somebody's expectations, how you didn't measure up, how you fell short. You're going to hear those voices. But when Jesus is the relationship in your life, His voice is so much clearer. And it comes through and it affirms your identity and who you are. He reminds you that they may say this about you, but here's what I'm saying about you. And He brings us to this place ultimately where we see how even in strong words like we've looked at this morning, it's so freeing. It's so refreshing to know that the God of this universe wants that kind of relationship with us. And so I ask you this morning, if you would, just to kind of bow your heads for a moment and begin to reflect. And I want you to think this morning. I want you to ask yourself, I'm going to go back to where we started this morning. I want you to just ask yourself an honest question this morning. Am I more of a fan or a follower? Is Jesus a relationship in my life, or is He the relationship in my life? And for some of you, you have this settled. You know that Jesus Christ, He's your Savior, He's your Lord. You have entrusted your life to Him, and the work of the Holy Spirit is active in your life, and you are walking with Him, and you know that's settled for you. The last thing, I'm not trying to make you doubt. If anything, God's probably affirming to you, you are my child, I'm with you. He's saying those words over you right now. But maybe if that's you, and you know that you're a follower of Jesus, and He is the relationship in your life, if that's you, maybe, just maybe, there is another relationship that's kind of creeped into your life that's interfering with the relationship in your life. My challenge to you this morning would be, put it in its place. Bring it before Jesus this morning. Confess that you need Him. Tell him that you want him as the relationship in your life. Ask him to forgive you for allowing someone to take his rightful seat on your heart, and leave from this place this morning with Jesus as the relationship in your life. But maybe you've never settled that. Maybe you've never settled that this morning. I would love to invite you to do that this morning. Maybe